on public debt, bonds, and financing will now come to order. We have 2 items on the agenda. If anybody would like to speak from the public on any of these items or in general public comment to this committee, please fill out a card in the back and give it to the clerk to the left. And with that, we'll start with item number 1.
Item number 1 is the City Administrative Officer reports, City Attorney report and draft ordinance relative to the issuance of Los Angeles Wastewater System revenue bonds, refunding Series 2009, and replacement documents.
Good morning. Sarai Baga from the CAO's office. The CAO report before you requests authority to issue up to $350 million in fixed-rate bonds to refund outstanding commercial paper. We also request authority to issue up to an additional $750 million to refund bonds that are currently callable if it were to make economic sense to do so, but at this point it does not. So we will continue to monitor those bonds for refunding opportunities in the future. We completed a review process reviewing obtaining bids from firms on our pre-qualified list for underwriters, and selected De La Rosa to be senior, Siebert to be co-senior, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, and Jackson to serve as co-managers. We are structuring the transaction to have a 20-year maturity, shorter maturities, because at this point the market is more amenable to retail sales, which will bring down the yield curve. So we're trying to attract as many retail buyers as possible now, and in the end it will bring down the rates that institutionals will be willing to accept. So we've structured the transaction in that manner. There's no general fund impact, as this is all payable by Sewer Construction and Maintenance Fund, and the department is also available to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. You said the market more often than I've heard on any matter before this committee. Why do you keep talking about the market? What's going on out there?
Well, over the last 12 to 14 months, the municipal market has had increasing pressures. There's been problems with liquidity, problems with credit, and the impact is that the interest rates are going up on municipal bonds, and we're having trouble selling our bonds. Last year, there were several agencies that had trouble selling their bonds. They had to postpone their sales, including the city. When we had the convention center going forward in October, we had to postpone the sale by a few days because there were no buyers in the market as a result of what was going on with the financial firms.
Now, the city of Los Angeles, okay, one particular example in October of last year was the convention center. They had to postpone the sale for a few days.
Yes.
And how about any other city departments have to do anything different? Because it's my understanding that there are some municipalities that have across the country that unfortunately haven't been able to sell some of their bonds for months now, which is causing a big problem. But how bad has it gotten for any particular transactions that we tried to commence here in the city in this environment?
Natalie Brill, CAO's office. DWP recently has sold, and they had to lower the amount that they were selling because they couldn't sell the whole amount. As it turned out, the day they actually went to market, there was interest at the end of January, and they sold. They also had to refund some of their debt in February because they had auction rate securities, and they were able to do that. But the issuance were smaller. One was $150 million, and the other one, I think, was $200 million. This deal could be up to $350 million. So our concern was, will we have to split it in two, or could we sell it all at once? Even the negotiated deals are having problems. We have not been in the market since the convention center sold, which has been about 6 months. We don't know how the market will react. We have some indication, because we are AA credit on wastewater, that things will be fine. LA Unified had the same problem, and they ended up selling all of their bonds. So it really is, I think, issuer by issuer and deal by deal.
And LAUSD's credit rating?
I think it's a AA also.
Okay, so if it's not exactly the same rating, it's very close. So we're in the same band of rating.
I think so. I'm not exactly sure. They could be one notch below or one notch above. I don't remember.
Same category, unlike.
I think so.
maybe some small city somewhere where they
Correct. It's
got
the
much.
A's that are having the most problems. Anybody who's an A minus, A or A plus. Those of us who luckily still are A, like wastewater is, a very strong credit, they have a better chance of doing well. And it's, we've seen very unusual things happen in the market, such as treasuries are doing better than municipal bonds. Well, treasuries are taxable and municipal bonds are tax exempt. So logically, it doesn't make sense to be buying a taxable debt versus tax exempt because you get a write-off on your taxes, both federal and California. So the question is why? Well, it has to do with no trust in the market right now. Not no trust of us, but no trust in the general municipal market. They trust treasuries, the U.S. government, more than they're trusting individual municipalities and states. It's not logical. It's just fear about the economy. And I think that we'll have wastewater is the first deal that's going out from us in 6 months, like I said, and it'll be a good indication of how we do. We have gotten a lot of inquiries. We have been talking to investors. So hopefully we'll have a good deal.
The thing that I find very interesting when the market is the way it's been since mid to late 2008 and to present, it's a very different market than most people working for the city have ever seen.
Correct.
It's been a long, long time since anybody's seen anything like this. But one of the things that I find kind of interesting is there is still money out there that needs to be invested.
Correct.
When you're an institution that has billions of dollars that you need to move around, that money needs to continue to work. And if you don't work that money, then I guess somebody else will try to do it for them. What I'm getting at is I can see even with those investors or potential investors, they would want to go at the safest investments or the most secure investments or the investments that have the least amount of volatility, whatever term that they want to attract as far as justifying the investment. And that's why it's important for us to be mindful of what is our rating. How do we compare in this market where people buy bonds? I think we're very fortunate about what our rating is. For example, it's my understanding that California, somebody just said, one of my colleagues said that California has the lowest of all the states right now.
Yes.
That's amazing.
Yes.
They were one of the strongest just 5-6 years ago.
Yes.
That's amazing. So
That was related to their budget problems.
sure.
That was really a direct result of the inability of the legislature and the executive to come to an agreement. That
Sure.
they were downgraded and put on negative watch, which is the worst of both worlds.
Yeah, it was people were wondering if there was going to be a complete meltdown. But again, back to the city of Los Angeles, luckily nobody's predicting any meltdown here, and therefore our ratings are still in the upper level, which means that I would assume that there's a market for us, that they will receive us and hopefully receive us well. When it comes to the firms, all are very familiar firms to the city. They've all done business with the city, and some have been increasing their activity with the city, so we have more of a personal reference on them. But when it comes to this kind of bond, is there any relevancy, or is there any indicators, market indicators, as to who has been more active in these kinds of bonds as of late than others? Or my understanding that firms like this end up on certain lists. They have the overall list, who's the most active, who's putting out more, who's selling more bonds than others across the country. And there are others saying, well, in this category of bond type, there are different lists where they say this firm might rank 20th overall in the country, but when a certain kind of bond, they might rank in the top 5. Is there any relevancy, or is there any references as to how these firms rank on these kinds of bonds as far as who's been the most active or hopefully the most successful?
Well, the bond buyer recognizes that Siebert has the most experience with wastewater and water system and revenue bonds. We selected De La Rosa to serve as senior because they have direct experience working with our wastewater system. Last year, when UBS announced that they were exiting the municipal market, they were one of our remarketing agents on the 2008 wastewater variable rate bonds. And we contacted all of the remaining firms on our pre-qualified list, and De La Rosa was the most responsive. They stepped in, they took over the UBS shares, and they've been remarketing them very successfully since then. So because they have some direct experience working with our wastewater system specifically, and given the way the market is right now, we need somebody who's very familiar and can sell the story of the wastewater system. We selected them to serve as the lead. Siebert is serving as co-senior.
You mentioned that scenario you said last year, De La Rosa stepped in?
Yes.
What part of last year?
They stepped
First
in
quarter, second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter?
third quarter.
Okay. So they have activity on this kind of bonds with the city in this environment?
Yes.
And who was involved in the DWP sales that you just talked about earlier? Was
Don't
De La Rosa
remember.
involved in one of those?
I don't remember. I know they're on their list, but I don't know if they were the lead or not.
Yeah, they're in the pool over at DWP, yeah.
I don't know.
All of them, all of these are in the pool. I'm not sure about
To
Jackson.
put it in context, this is not the only deal we're working on. We're also working on a MICLA deal that has already been approved by council, and Siebert is the lead, senior book runner on that one. And to kind of compare, the reason we selected and recommended to the council Siebert to be the lead is because they had done a previous MICLA deal. And for the same reason, we needed somebody who's familiar with our debt, who's familiar with the program, to really go out there and sell. And we happen to have sold in August, last time. So this time, we're not selling till March or April. Again, the market has changed, and we need to
Even though the market is crazy, and to
They
use
know
a
our
generic
program.
term, August is still different than today, which is still going to be
Correct.
unpredictably different than March or April.
Correct, but they knew our fundamental program, so we needed someone that didn't have to come in and learn not just what the market was like, but just, our program. So Siebert is the lead on that deal. And the third bond that we're working on is the solid waste, the trash trucks and the solid, resources bond for sanitation. And the lead on that one is Stone and Youngberg, because it's a smaller deal, they have a different experience. So we're definitely looking at all of our deals, not in a vacuum, but in the whole program. And as deals come up, and with the market the way it is, we are starting to be, very selective on who we're choosing and trying to match up the program with that.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because there's something that I need to understand whether or not we're benefiting from. If you look back over the last few years, it sounds like organizations are playing different roles, and names that perhaps were playing minor roles are now playing medium or lead roles.
Correct.
In the last few years. And now it seems like we're becoming more comfortable with seeing more names of firms playing the lead role today. Ironically, and I don't think anybody in this room wants to take credit for that, because nobody saw the market
Correct.
being what it is today. Obviously, people said, economy is not going to be great forever, there's always corrections or what have you, but I don't think anybody saw the depths of changes that are going on today that are affecting this market. But are we benefiting from the fact that we're having good experiences with a broader range of firms that are playing a lead role and taking turns playing a lead role?
I think so, and I think that to the council's credit, we had a list already in place. So a year before all this happened, we were familiar with a lot of the regional firms, with the big firms, and so when things started happening in the market, we were able to come back to you very quickly and say, these are the people on our list, we need to replace them, we need to put them back. So that really, we would have gone in that direction anyway, but the fact that we had whole year to work with these firms, I think really gave us an edge.
Because some of the firms we were most comfortable with, and I'm not saying anything bad about that. I mean,
No,
there's some huge firms that Florida, Chicago, New York, San Francisco, LA we're comfortable with that had marquees on their front door in business since 1852 or in business or the oldest firm in the business, and some of them are now gone.
Yes.
Again, if anybody in this room would have been asked that question 3 years ago, give me a name of a firm that's...
Bear Stearns.
Bear Stearns.
Bear Stearns. If somebody would have said, I bet you in 2009, Bear Stearns will not be in existence. First of all, people would have probably said, you need to be put in a straitjacket, you know, I pray for you, but you're nuts, right? And look, they're gone. Yet at the same time, not to say that they did or didn't serve us well. When they were in existence, they earned a certain reputation, and in this particular type of business, they seem to be doing just fine. Our books show that. But at the same time, I think that we're very fortunate that we are now giving lead responsibility because our internal workings show that they were qualified, and we gave them the opportunity to take lead or medium roles rather than minor roles, and they've served us well. And luckily for us, we have a comfort level based on our dealings with them that we otherwise didn't have a few years ago. Yet at the same time, some of the firms we would have naturally gone to in 2009 aren't even around. Which other firms are now gone?
Lehman Brothers, right?
Lehman Brothers.
Lehman Brothers, UBS exited the municipal market, and
Says Bear and.
those are the largest.
And, yeah. Those are the three big ones that left.
And that was definitely a discussion point that we had when we were deciding who to select to serve as underwriters. And we felt that there was some concern with the stability of the larger firms, although we didn't want to give up the possibility of accessing their retail capabilities.
Sure.
But we were definitely cognizant of the fact that the larger firms were did not appear to be as stable and would not potentially serve us as best as the more regional firms.
Well, one of the things that I think that, in my opinion, that we can now look back and say, that's interesting. I would have never thought that the strength and size and diversity of activity of a firm would be something that could actually hurt them across the board. And that seems to be one of the strengths now with some of the medium and smaller firms, is they don't have activity in other areas. They focus just on this, which before, I'm sure the big firms are saying, yeah, we do that very well, and we do these things very well, and it's great to have a relationship with us, because if you need us in 10 different areas, we can be the firm that does business with the City of LA or Department of Water and Power. And now these firms, some of the firms that are still doing business with us and we're happy with their performances, they've always been honest in saying, I would love to do those things, but I'm not going to sell myself as doing those things because we just don't do those. But we do this very well. And here we are. We're not asking these firms to do 10 things for us. We're asking them to do one thing: sell our bonds, do the best job possible, make the best of the market, and here we are.
And that was the problem with the wastewater last year when we came to you too quickly on getting that done, was that it wasn't just a problem with the underwriters, it was a problem with the letter of credit, it was a problem with, the underwriters. There was
Insurance?
Insurance.
I was just going to say insurance.
It
Who'd
was
have thought?
there were three problems all at once. Underwriters were leaving, letters of credit were leaving the market, and insurance, it hit us all at once. And it was something that nobody would have predicted.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're just, and this is a direct result of that deal, that because we could not get $600 million letter of credit, we had to get only 440 and issue the rest in commercial paper. Well, now sanitation's out of commercial paper. We're at 300 million. We have to refund that out so they can continue the construction projects. So what happened last year about this time is now we're finally doing the cleanup of that final, was a conglomerate of events that hit us all at once.
Right.
And nobody, okay, insurance goes out fine. Somebody exits the letter of credit market, fine. Underwriters come and go, fine, but all at once. So now we're trying to get back to more stability. And I think that this will help us definitely get there.
Well, we are definitely in very different times than we anticipated. and we're definitely in times that unfortunately can and do affect us on the bottom dollar, which is by and large beyond our control, or even the firms that we send out to do our business. When it comes to the other portion of the $750 million, what is the anticipation if and when the timing comes that we want to exercise that activity? Are we going to be looking at the same firms, or are we going to look back at the pool? What is the likely scenario?
It depends on the timing of it. The way the report was written and the resolution was written, it gives us flexibility until the end of this fiscal year. And so if we determine that it's economic to refund after that point, then we'll have to come back to you with all new documents. Before that point, we would be able to access the same firms. But we would still have to come back to council for the specific documents for the additional amounts.
Okay. So, and on the second $750 million, will you conduct interviews again and talk with them about how they feel we should activate that activity?
I think we will, because of how volatile the market is. I think we need to keep those conversations fresh, because we'll need to make decisions based on current information.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's ready to predict what this summer's going to be like. No, not me. All right. Okay. And how formal or informal, because these firms are already in our pool. So how formal or informal was the conversations or activity on this, picking the roles of the firms that are actually going to engage in this $350 million?
We issued a mini RFP and asked for proposals back. So we reviewed their proposals and had our own set of criteria that we were looking at. So it's structured almost like as if it was a regular RFP process.
Okay.
It's just targeted to those firms on the list.
So that was, they submitted their proposals in writing, and then you called them in and asked them to explain in detail what they were talking about, so there's no misunderstandings about what their recommendations were, or what was it?
Actually, the process was just we received the proposals, and based on the proposals made a selection process, because when we originally went through the pre-qualification phase, we did interviews and conducted interviews and discussed issues with them at that point. So in the interest of trying to move this as quickly as possible, we didn't feel we needed to do interviews at that point.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. Okay. Anything else you'd like to add? I see Enrique back there looking at the clock. You really need the money, huh?
Yes.
Yes. All right. Okay. Is there anybody here from the public who'd like to comment on item number 1? We're currently in item number 1. Public comment is open on item number 1. Seeing and hearing no one come forward on item number 1 for public comment. Public comment is now closed. With that, this committee will move this item forward. And we have a placeholder on council?
Yes, for Friday.
For tomorrow, Friday. Okay, I guess we'll see some of you in Van Nuys. You show up to City Hall tomorrow, we're not going to be there. We're going to be in Van Nuys for our first Friday of the month meeting of the council. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Item number 2.
Item number 2 is the city attorney report and draft ordinance relative to amending section 11.27 of the Los Angeles Administrative Code to modify city procedures for issuance and sale of bonds to pay judgments. Budget and Finance Committee on February 23rd, 2009 recommended approval.
Okay.
The city has issued...
Name for the record?
Oh, Marilyn Garcia, Assistant City Attorney. The city has issued judgment bonds about 5 times before, and judgment bonds are a little different. They're issued to finance an obligation imposed by law, which is usually a lawsuit that the city has lost, and there's a judgment that we have to
A
pay.
judgment or a settlement?
Well, it can be a settlement, but it has to be approved by the court so that it is an obligation imposed by law. That's what our outside bond attorneys say. So, but anyway, we're only financing something that obviously qualifies here. And the council's been informed about those settlements. And in any event, historically, we have issued these bonds pursuant to procedures that are in the administrative code. which the charter lets us do if there's a procedural ordinance in place. But most judgment obligation bonds issued in the state are issued under the state refunding law. And we reviewed the pros and cons of going one way or the other, and we decided that it was preferable this time to use the refunding law instead of the procedural ordinance. Okay. But the procedural ordinance ironically said even if you issued bonds under the refunding law, you still had to comply with the rules and procedures of the procedural ordinance, which sort of made no sense. And so all this ordinance does is change our procedural ordinance to say the city can issue these bonds under either the procedural ordinance or the refunding law. It just kind of clears up that overlap.
Okay, so basically this is a legal cleanup language.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now, what was the basic concern regarding competitive versus negotiated? Is that an element of something we needed to clarify here as well? I mean, are we clarifying that by this action, or was that something that wasn't even an issue?
That was part of it. What the two main differences is the procedural ordinance didn't say whether the city could pay cost of issuance out of bond proceeds, which is what we always do. And so this makes, the refunding law clearly says we can pay cost of issuance out of bond proceeds. If the city doesn't have the money to pay the judgments, we don't want to have to come up with the money to pay the expenses. And then the procedural ordinance also at this point required a competitive sale, where the refunding law is more flexible.
Okay, so this will allow us to either go competitive or negotiated.
Mm-hmm.
And what's the likelihood of a transaction like this that we would go competitive?
That's not a legal question.
But I know you know this area, so I'm sorry I asked you that question.
At this point in time, I don't think it's possible, but
You mean to go competitive?
to go competitive.
Because no, right now, you got to be out of your mind a bid, thinking you know what the market's going to be like tomorrow,
Correct.
right? So,
It's not something, that's one of the things that we talked about, about the procedural ordinance. And in most, all the other ones were done competitive, and they usually are done across the country competitive, but I just don't think the market is there.
and therefore, it doesn't make sense for us to, I think would be neglectful if we
Yes.
couldn't legally and appropriately allow ourselves the option. We can go competitive if we feel that's the best thing to do at the moment, or go negotiated on these bonds.
Correct. I mean, the key during this time period, like I said before, is flexibility. We need to be flexible and understand that the market is very rigid, but we need to be flexible. And that's what this ordinance will allow us to do.
Now, Marilyn, there's something interesting about the term competitive when people are talking about bidding, when you look at it from the generic sense. But when you look at the negotiated versus competitive when it comes to bonds, it's not the same thing. I'm trying to think of a word that we use that means something totally different when you get into a particular arena. What I'm saying is even the charter speaks to competitive. It doesn't speak to bonds being competitive.
Yeah, there are competitive bidding procedures in the charter, yes.
Yeah, but that's the generic term.
Right, it's very
It's not
generic,
speaking
yeah.
to the difference between competitive and negotiated when it comes to bond sales.
No, in the charter, the word competitive can be not deceptive, but confusing, I think, because
Yeah.
a lot of people think of competitive selection process as being sealed bids.
Mhm.
And you can have a competitive process that doesn't require a sealed bid, it's just an open and fair competition.
Mhm.
And so we have to be careful that we don't use the word competitive in a way that isn't appropriate. Now, in the underwriting world, a competitive bid usually does mean a sealed bid or bids that are submitted simultaneously. So it does have the narrow meaning in the underwriting world. But in the charter and more generally, it has a broader meaning.
Yeah, but also, when it comes to bond sales and using a negotiated method, it doesn't mean that there was no competition, there was no vetting, there was no figuring out which are the best firms to do the best work for the city.
That's true, and Sarai's mention of the competitive process was described that. Although there was a recent case, the name of which I forget, it starts with a W, that the city lost regarding the interpretation of competitive bidding, and the judge, and it was a selection of some kind of a contractor, it wasn't bonds.
Yeah,
and
that's right.
yeah, and the judge interpreted competitive bidding to almost mean sealed bids. But so now we have to make findings, the council or the bidding authority has to make findings that sealed competitive bids are not appropriate. But it's not that we're required to have, we would be required, I guess, under the judge's interpretation.
That particular judge.
Yeah. And apparently that case isn't being appealed.
It's not.
So we're living with it, I guess. That's not, other attorneys in the office, I guess, made that determination. But we still have the flexibility of going under the charter. We just have to have findings that a sealed process isn't appropriate. It's just one more little hoop we have to jump through.
So it goes as far as us having to make findings that sealed bid is not appropriate in that particular
Yeah.
potential activity. We have to go as far as saying not appropriate, or go as far as saying they're equally beneficial to the city, whether we do sealed bids or this other process?
There's language in the charter that actually has the words that the bidding authority has to determine. And in one case, it's for temporary and occasional professional services, and it's appropriate in some other word, but it's a factual determination. And then more broadly, you can make that same determination. But we always just make sure that we track the language of the charter so that we're in compliance.
Well, the interesting about that is, I think something that people would not argue that is professional services is outside counsel. Professional services, right?
Well, there's a list in the charter, but it's generically professional services of a temporary and occasional character. That's section 2 of that particular thing. And then there's a section 11 that's the catch-all that's more general. I wish I would have brought my chart and I could read it.
But, okay, so like on item 1, we had firms that are going to sell bonds for us. Are those professional services?
Yes.
We have a finding in there.
In the report, which I don't have a copy of, I only have the ordinances, the finding is in there. If you look there, we made sure the finding was there.
Yeah, there's a finding. And this was a lawsuit that just happened, but based on our policies anyway, we're required to make a finding. And one of the things that we discussed 2 years ago, by charter.
Forget about what the judges want.
And by policy.
By policy and our
Correct.
charter.
When we were redoing the debt management section and we had the discussions with you on the difference between competitive and negotiated, one of the things that we talked about was criteria for negotiating, criteria for competitive. And within the meaning of bonds. Okay, clarify that.
Yeah, bonds.
So one of the things that we talked about was the market. And you just said it. There's no way in today's market that we can go competitive. It's too volatile. So the finding basically reflects that. I mean, that is a valid reason to go negotiated. Another reason to go negotiated would be, a unique type of financing. But yet another way to go competitive would be like GO bonds. They're so common. They're guaranteed by the property owners. I mean, there are the Tran, for example. It's a 1-year bond. It's not long-term debt. I mean, there are good reasons to do both in this market, and until it corrects itself or we get some stability, it's very unlikely that we could ever make a finding for competitive. Why would the city risk a no-bid situation?
Yeah, exactly.
And that happened to New York. You know, they
Oh,
had a
really?
no bid, about a year and a half ago. They went forward, or maybe not that long ago, but a year ago. They had no bids.
City?
Connecticut had to lower theirs. State of Connecticut went out for competitive bids. They had like a 300 or 400 million. They only were able to sell 200. So they sold the 200 and came back later and sold the other half negotiated. But at this point in time, knowing we need money right away, knowing that these are unique financings like judgment is anyway, why would we risk that? We wouldn't. We would go negotiate it. It's not the common way we would do it, but the market has shifted. So there already are parameters for us to go with. But this lawsuit just puts an additional burden on us to actually make the finding according to the lawsuit. And until that changes, we'll continue to make that finding specifically in accordance with what the city attorney has told us to.
In that lawsuit, was it professional services that were being bid or that we were contracting out?
I don't think it was, but I just read the judgment to kind of determine what we needed to find. It was a brief decision by the court, and I suspect it didn't even describe the services. I don't know.
Interesting. Okay, so this item, we're looking at cleanup language, something that we recognize needs to be clarified so we don't find ourselves in a situation where there are misunderstandings and challenges or what have you. Okay. Okay, thank you. Is there anybody here for item number 2? We're currently on item number 2 in this committee. It is now open for public comment. Is anybody here for public comment on item number 2? Seeing and hearing no one come before me for public comment on item number 2. Public comment is now closed. Okay, with that, we'll move this item forward. Anybody ask for a placeholder on? No. Okay. We'll probably hear it next week in council. It already went through the budget
Earliest would be
committee.
Wednesday.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, hopefully that would be possible. I mean,
So then let's shoot for Wednesday to hear it on the council.
thank you.
Thank you. All right. Okay, there are no more items agendized before this committee, so it's open for general public comment. This committee is now open for general public comment. Is there anybody here who'd like to make general comments to this committee? Seeing and hearing none, general public comment is now closed. This committee is now adjourned. Thank you.